Hi, I'm Mike from Craft Supplies USA, and today we'll be turning a premium pen kit. This is the Junior Statesman pen, and it's available in rollerball, and there's also a fountain pen conversion for it. This is a great desk pen and a really good gift for your business executives or people who graduated college, and it makes a really nice pen. In this video, I'll show you my tips and tricks for turning a high-end pen kit that you want to charge a premium price for or give as a very special gift. Here I have our supplies for the video we'll be doing today. I've got our Junior Statesman pen kit, and then we have our stabilized PPU. This is the blank I'll be turning. It's stabilized, so it'll be really wear resistant and make it a lot more durable, as well as easier to turn and finish. And this with a CA finish on it will look really, really nice. I also have a pen box that'll fit our pen kit, and then if you wanted to turn a matching keychain lighter or a smaller slimline or everyday carry type of pen to match, that would make a really nice matching set as a gift. So let's get this cleared off. We'll get our lathe up here and we'll start turning. Alright, for this kit we have our PPU blank and it's stabilized. And when you're doing a higher end pen kit, something above $15, between $15 and $30, you want to use a premium blank. That's why I've gone with this PPU, because it's a nice burl. It'll look really well, look really good when it's done. Another option is get a really high-end acrylic, or you can do some cool segmented materials or anything you want to do, but just make sure pair a premium kit with a premium blank, and that's going to help it sell if you go to a market, and it'll make for a nicer gift as well. But with this blank, some of the prep work I've done is I got my tubes and marked out where I need to cut the blank, so I have the right length of blank for the top tube and the bottom tube because they are different in length. And then this is going to be our waste material here. This one has some burl inclusion, so I figured I'd cut that off and use more of the solid blank on this end, and that'll give us a really good looking blank. I also have a line drawn across the blank, that way for when we assemble the pen, we have good grain alignment. That way we can match these up when we go to assemble it. But the first steps is I need to cut this blank down, then we can drill it out for our pen tubes and we can glue the tubes in. So I'll mount this in the pen drilling jaws on my VM100. And we'll start by cutting off the waste material here on this end, and then we'll be cutting it off here in the middle. If you have a bandsaw, you can cut it on there, but we'll just be doing this on the lathe today. And for this process, this blank is a little crooked during the curing process. When it was stabilized, it got a little crooked. So we'll get this centered up as best we can in these jaws, make sure they're nice and tight, and then we can get our our nano parting tool and cut a really narrow curve when we separate these. That way the grain aligns really well. So make sure that spins freely, get your tool rest set up, make sure your tail rest is locked down nice and tight, and then we'll get on our safety glasses. And for you, this is a poisonous material, so you definitely want to wear a dust mask or respirator. Some people are allergic to it, but we've got a good dust collection system here out of frame of camera. So we'll turn this on, make sure it spins nice and good, and we'll turn this up to about 2,000 RPM, and we can part off our waste piece here. And I'll be using the nano parting tool. This is a 30-second wide curve, and we can just part off our waste. Okay, I'll back up the tailstock and let that fall out of the way, and then I can bring my tailstock back up. Make sure you can see your cut line while it's spinning, so I'm just going to draw an extra line here so I can see that as it's rotating. Turn our lathe back on, and with each of these marks I gave myself for the tubes, I added 1/8 of an inch extra just in case I have a blowout with the drill bit. That way I can barrel trim it and still have the correct length of blank. And then I can catch that blank. So this is going to be our top blank. This is the 12.5 millimeter drill bit blank we need for this end. So I can set that off to the side. And while this is still in the lathe, I'll grab my skew and square up the end here. That way we'll help our drill bit center up. Alright, so I have my skew here. I'm going to create a small dimple for our drill bit to self-center on. We'll drop our speed down to around 500. And for the lower tube, this is the longer tube, smaller diameter. This uses a 10.5 millimeter drill bit. So we'll get that mounted in our keyless chuck. And one of the tips I like to do is I like to bring the tailstock up to the blank where it's touching the drill bit while it's loose. Advance the bit, make sure everything's on center, then I lock this down. And then we can start drilling this out. That's going to give us a more concentric hole and a tighter fit between the tube and the blank. And with this being a burl, being stabilized as well, it's going to be a little tougher to drill than other materials. So you want to take your time and make sure you clear out the chips in your drill bit. And you don't want to generate a lot of heat. So make sure you use a nice sharp bit and clear those chips frequently. Because that shavings, they get packed into the flutes, especially being stabilized because there's plastic now in the wood shavings. Those pack in there really, really tight and prevent the shavings from clearing out of the flutes effectively. I back this out about every ½ inch of travel and clear out these flutes. If you have an air compressor, it makes it a lot quicker. And now that we're running out of play in our quill here, I'm just going to advance that and loosen up the tailstock and advance it all the way in, and then we'll start using the quill to drill. And as I'm getting near the end of the blank, I want to really slow down my feed rate with the quill and just let that drill bit ease its way out of the blank. If you have a lot of pressure on that, as soon as you get to the very end of your blank, you're going to bust out all those fibers and lose about an 1/8 inch of material. So we got a really clean drill exit here on the end, and that's why we leave these about an 1/8 inch longer when we cut them. Just in case we do have a blowout, we still have enough material to salvage the blank. So now we can start drilling our top blank. This is a 12.5 millimeter drill bit that's required for the top tube. So we can mount this in our pen drilling jaws. Make sure that's nice and snug. And then we'll do the same thing with this one. We'll square up the end, give ourselves a small dimple, and we can move this drill bit and put this one away. Bump our speed back up for our skew, about 2,000 RPM. Alright, we'll drop our speed down to around 500. Alright, and again we keep our tailstock loose and advance that till the bit is contacting our blank. Then we lock it down, and then we can start advancing our bit. This bit is extremely dull. You can see we have just a little bit of wobble in our drill bit, but that's going to be okay. We have enough wall thickness, that shouldn't be a problem. This bit's requiring a lot more force than that 10.5 mil. I think this one is due for a sharpening. But it's taking quite a bit more pressure with our quill to get this thing to engage and start cutting. Clear out our flutes. Make sure there's no chips bound up. Make sure you clear those chips. And as we start getting close to the end of that blank, we want to make sure we slow down our feed rate and just ease that out of the blank. All right, let's take this out of the chuck and make sure we didn't have a bad blowout. Looks like we had a really bad one. There was a really bad bark inclusion or a burl piece there that chunked out on me. Let's see if our tube's gonna be long enough to still make that work. I think we'll be okay. The tube's sticking out just a little bit in that blown out section, but I think we can shorten that up by about a 32nd and still be fine with our overall length. So we'll give it a shot. So now that we have our blanks drilled out and ready to glue in, I'll set these off to the side and we'll take our keyless chuck out of the lathe and we can glue in our tubes. So let me get that ready and get our supplies for that and we'll glue in our tubes. All right, so I have a piece of paper towel here. I've got our tubes. And the nice thing about these Junior Statesman tubes is they now come pre-scuffed, so we don't have to have sandpaper to scuff our tubes up for a better bond. They're already ready to go. And I'll be using the Glue Boost Fill and Finish. Reason I'm using this is because it's a really good, basically instant setting glue, and it has a lot of working time. It doesn't kick over until I spray it with activator. That way I can position the tubes exactly where I need them before it'll kick over. A lot of the CAs out there almost kick over immediately as soon as you spray them on. So I'm using this today, and I've got our blanks here. So we've got our top and our bottom blank. We'll start with the bigger one. So what I like to do is basically coat the tube in CA glue. I like to coat the tube in CA glue, get a nice thin layer on there. Then I'll grab my blank. And then as I'm inserting this, I like to twist it and spread that glue around really well. That's going to ensure a really good bond. And if you wanted a more permanent bond, you could use epoxy, but that's completely up to you. So I just press that in there until the tube is flush with the end of our blank, and then I'll hit it with some activator. We can set that one off to the side, and now we'll do the same thing with our lower tube. It's probably a good idea to throw some gloves on just so you don't get your fingers coated in CA glue, but I'll leave that up to you. Again, just spread that back and forth, going in and out quite a bit. Make sure that CA gets all over on the inside of our blank, and then I press that flat. Make sure my tube's all the way in our blank, and then we can set that with our activator. I'll let these cure for just a minute or two, and then we can barrel trim these. And what we can do is we can remount these into our chuck jaws and then use our barrel trimmer and do it this way. A lot of guys, they hold the blank while they're barrel trimming, but that's kind of a recipe for disaster, so we don't recommend doing that at all. We'll mount these into our jaws. That'll hold it secure for us, and then we can just use a drill and then drill these out. All right, so now that our pen blanks are glued up and the glue is cured really well, we're ready to barrel trim. And the purpose for barrel trimming is to square up the end of the blank with the edge of the tube, as well as to clear out and remove any contaminants inside the brass tube that could cause the blank to split when you press it together. So it's going to scrape out any glue or anything or any burrs you have on the inside, and then it's going to square off the ends of the blank, so when you press those parts together, they fit really nice with no gaps. That's the entire point of barrel trimming. So we'll mount this back into our chuck, and then we can lock our spindle. That's going to keep that in place, keep our fingers and everything out of the way of the barrel trimmer. A lot of people hold the blank in their hand while they're barrel trimming, and if it slips or the blank slips, you have these 4 really aggressive teeth that'll go right into your palm. So you don't want to hold the blank by hand. And we'll mount this just in a cordless drill. And when I barrel trim, I like to keep the speed up and the pressure fairly light. I want this to do the cutting action. I don't want to be forcing it into the wood because I can cause it to tear out and split our blank. So I'll get our 12.5mm pilot shaft with our barrel trimmer, get that mounted, and then turn this on, and then just slowly advance that blank until the brass and the wood are all nice and square. All right, that looks good on this end. Now we can take this out of the chuck and flip it around. And I want to be really careful because we had our blowout already. These teeth are pretty aggressive. I want to take really light cuts on this as we barrel trim. That way I don't blow this out even more. All right, we're pretty much square there. I've got a tiny bit of a gap here on this end where the blowout was. I'm gonna barrel trim that in just a little bit further. All right, now that one's ready to go. We can take this out of the chuck. Now we've got a nice square end on each blank. That's gonna give us a really good fit between our parts. So we'll mount our smaller tube in, and you can see we have about 3/16 of material to remove. And I need to switch our pilot shaft now. This one was the 12.5 millimeter pilot shaft. I'm gonna switch that for our 10.5. All right, so now we have our 10.5 millimeter pilot shaft. We'll get that into our blank and start squaring this up. Stop and check, see if you're close. We've got just a hair of material left to remove. And what I usually do is I'll stop as soon as the edge of that brass is showing, and that means we have a good fit. And that way we're not trimming past our brass tube and shortening the overall length. Flip that around. This side has a lot less material to remove. A lot of times if there's a 1/4 inch of material that I have to barrel trim, I'll just go to a disc sander or a belt sander and just sand that most of the way down. It'll be a lot quicker than trying to barrel trim through that much material. All right, we're almost there. Okay, now our brass tube's exposed and we got a nice square fit. We'll set our barrel trimmer off to the side. We can take our blank out of our chuck and we'll take the chuck off the lathe. And I'll show you my method for turning a more high-end premium kit where I want the parts to be perfectly fitting and concentric. So what I like to do when I'm turning a premium kit is I like to turn each half of the blanks independently of each other, and I don't use a mandrel. I like to turn them just between the bushings and a dead center here on the end, just a 60-degree dead center. And then we can bring up our 60-degree cone center on the other end. Get our tool rest over. And what this allows us to do is we don't have the flex of our mandrel shaft. When you're turning 2 pens, a lot of the times, the middle of that mandrel, it's just such a skinny mandrel that I think bows and flexes. You get a lot of chatter and you get non-concentric pens. So I like to turn each of these independently with a 60-degree drive on a cone just directly on our bushings here. Once that is mounted between our tailstock there and our centers, I just snug up the quill just slightly. You don't need a ton of pressure, and then we can set up our tool rest and then we're ready to turn. All right, so now that we have our blank between centers on our bushings, we're ready to start turning. So make sure you have your eye protection and dust protection on, and we'll be turning this with a spindle roughing gouge about 2,000 to 3,000 RPM depending on what your lathe can do. So we'll turn this on. We'll bump up our speed. And with a burl blank like this, even though it's stabilized, you still want to be really careful rounding the corners off. If you get too aggressive, you can have it chunk out and then have an irreparable damage to the blank. So you want to be nice and gentle, ease into your cut, and just start rounding those corners off. Just take small bites at a time and be patient. And on this pen kit in particular, I like to have a slightly convex shape to it. Nothing too crazy, just a nice gradual curve from bushing to bushing. And we'll be using the spindle roughing gouge for pretty much the entire roughing process, and then we'll switch to our skew to do our final finishing cuts. And we'll turn this about a 64th of an inch proud of our bushings before we switch to our skew. And again, we're going for that slightly convex shape to it, just a little bit of a barrel profile, but not too aggressive. If we stop the lathe and take a look, we should be getting a pretty clean cutting action with that spindle roughing gouge, and you can see those burl eyes really starting to pop here, and that U has a really pretty color to it and a really nice natural warmth to it as well. So we'll turn this back on and just snug your quill up. If you feel anything start to come loose, just snug it up slightly. All right, we're getting close to our bushing on this end. All right, I think we're ready to switch to our skew to get our final shape. And I don't know if you can tell in the video, but this is running a lot more concentric than what I get on a regular pen mandrel. I don't have any outer roundness in the bushings, which you typically tend to get, especially over time as the mandrel gets a little bent. But with our skew, we'll be using this as a negative rig scraper, so it'll be flat on our tool rest, handle nice and flat, and this is just a nice way to get a really smooth flowing curve, and we won't have any chance of blowouts or tear outs with this tool. Alright, and I want to turn this pretty much right to the bushings, just a slightly proud if anything. That way it gives us some room to sand this right to our bushing size. And on a premium pen kit like this, you don't want to have the wood or acrylic, whatever blank material you have, be smaller than the part diameter. So you want to make sure you leave the wood or anything slightly proud, that way when you sand it, it's right to your bushing diameter. And now I'm just looking to refine the curve that we have, get that really smooth barrel profile. All right, I'm happy with the shape and we're just slightly proud of our bushing, so now it's time to go to our sandpaper. So I'll move our tool rest out of the way and we'll drop our speed down to around 700 RPM. And I'll start out with the 180 grit. Actually, let's take a look at our surface. There's no tear out or any chip outs or anything, so the surface is actually really cleanly cut. I think we could start sanding with 220. If I started with the 180, it would leave some really deep scratch marks behind, and I don't want to have to try and sand those out later. So we'll start with 220, and if that's not cutting efficiently, we can drop back to our 180. All right, we're just looking to refine what we did with our tool. Now we'll go to our 320. All right, we'll stop the lathe and see if we have any deep scratch marks that we need to sand laterally with from end to end here, just to get rid of those radial lines that might be in the surface. All right, and that should be good. All right, so now we're ready for our finish. We've got our blank sanded and ready to go. We've got a really good looking blank here. For my final finish on this, I really want to maintain the natural warmth and feel of the wood here. This is just such a really nice wood, and you want it to feel really good in the hand. I don't want to do a CA finish on this. It would be really good if we did just for a super high gloss finish, but it has a plasticky feel to CA finishes, so I want to retain the natural warmth and beauty of this wood. And what we'll do is we'll seal the blank with a thin CA just to saturate and fill all the wood fibers, and that'll help protect the blank over time. And then we'll sand that back down a little bit, and then we'll do kind of just a satin polish on there with some Yorkshire grit. That's going to leave us a really good satin look on this pen kit. So the glue I'll be using, this is the Fill and Finish Ultra Thin. This stuff's thinner than water, so it'll wick in really, really well into all these little burl eyes that have little voids in there. Fill those in. Prevent any damage from water or moisture or anything like that, and then we'll sand that back. So first step I need to do before we put our CA on is I just want to get a piece of paper towel and just get rid of any dust or debris that's on this blank. I don't want to trap that on the surface. And you can see on that paper towel a whole bunch of dust on there, so that's good we did that. And I'll fold this over and we'll get our CA glue, and we'll just do one saturating coat just to seal up the fibers. I know it's stabilized, but just adding this little top coat, that's going to add quite a bit of protection to it. And that stuff lays really, really flat, so we don't have to spend a lot of time sanding it as well. We'll hit that with some activator, and we'll stop the lathe and show this off, but you can see just how rich and warm this U is. And then we have those contrasting, really dark burl eyes in that surface, and it's going to make a really nice pen when it's done. So that activator should kick that over really quick, which it did. And now we can go to our Yorkshire grit. This is such a thin layer here, the Yorkshire grit's going to just cut and refine that and give us a really nice satin look on this pen kit. Alright, with our Yorkshire grit, this is a fairly coarse polishing paste, about 800 grit to 1000 grit roughly. It's got a bunch of heavy waxes in there, and then this will just polish that CA glue and give us a really nice finish. So we can bump up our speed now because we're polishing. And we'll apply a fair amount of friction to this surface. Let that Yorkshire grit do its polishing action. Add just a little more. And then I'll get a clean piece of paper towel and then just buff this surface. Alright, let's stop the lathe and take a look. Alright, so we have a really nice satin, warm feel to it. You can still feel the wood texture to it, and you don't have that plasticky feel of the CA. So I'm really happy with that, and this top blank is done. So now we can take this off our lathe. So now we can pop our bushings out of this blank. We'll set these off to the side. Set that right there. And now we'll do basically the exact same process for the longer blank. The only difference is the bushings on the top barrel are the same diameter, so it doesn't matter which orientation. However, on the longer blank, there is two different diameters of bushing. One is slightly larger and one's smaller. The smaller one is for the tail cap end of the blank, and this one is for the writing nib end of the blank. So you want to make sure when you assemble this, you have the right orientation. And this is our grain alignment here, so I'll do the writing nib on this end, and then this will be our end cap nib bushing. And we can just mount that back up. Again, not too tight with our quill. We'll bring our tool rest back into position, and then we'll do the same turning process. Again, we want to just ease these corners off. We don't want to be too aggressive. As I cut through the waste material, those corners on this end, I want to ease those off. I don't want to be too aggressive. I could have them tear out on me. And again, we're looking to be slightly proud of our bushings, and then we'll switch to our skew with that nice convex profile. Alright, I think we're about there. We can switch to our skew now. And that skew really allows you to refine your shape because it's so easy to control. Alright, now we can go to our sandpaper. Set the tools out of the way, and then we'll drop our speed back down to our 700 RPM. And that 220 grit really worked well on the first blank, so we'll stick with that this time. Now we can go to our 320. Then we'll stop our lathe and then sand laterally. Again, the reason is to get rid of those radial scratches. And if you're using a really light colored wood, you want to be careful, because a lot of times as you sand across your bushings, you get some of those metal powder dust, and it'll contaminate the surface, especially if you're doing something really light like holly. That stuff stains extremely easily. So a lot of times I'll just take those off the bushings and sand it by hand. But on this piece, it shouldn't be an issue. We'll get a clean piece of paper towel here. get rid of any contaminants, dust, debris. And then we'll use that ultra fine, ultra thin fill and finish for our sealing coat. And then we can hit it with our activator. About 8 to 10 inches away, a couple light bursts. A lot of times with some other glues, if you over activate it, it'll foam white and then you have to sand it all down, so just be careful. Depending on the brand of CA you're using, not to over activate it. Alright, once that's cured, we can bump our speed back up, 2500 RPM, and we'll use that Yorkshire grit to polish down that CA. That gives us a really nice satin feel and look to the blank. And the CA really pops the natural colors in the material, which is one reason I like the CA, because it's clear. It doesn't leave an amber tone or color to it. It just enhances those natural colors that are already in the material. And then get a clean section of cloth and then buff that down. Yeah, I'm really happy with the finish on that. I think it pairs really well with this type of blank and then the kit we're doing as well. So I'll take this off the lathe and show you how it looks. Just a tiny bit of gloss to it, but nice and satin while maintaining the natural colors in the material. Alright, now that we have our blanks turned, let's get this assembled. So I'll clean off our lathe bed, get our pen press, our kit components, get everything cleaned up, and then we'll put this together. Alright, so we have our pen kit components and our pen press, and we're ready to assemble. But before we do that, let's go over the components and we can label these out so you know exactly which parts go where. Starting at the top, we have our clip cap assembly. That's going to be the top of our pen. Then we have our center band coupler. Then we have our writing nib and writing nib coupler. And then lastly, we have our end cap coupler, and this is a postable end cap, so you can screw the cap onto the end there. We also have our premium rollerball refill. This is a Schmidt brand. It's going to give you a really nice writing experience as well. So let's start to get this assembled. And one thing to note with this Junior Statesman kit and then the Junior Gent pen kits as well, these have a different fit than most other pen kits. Most of the time you press in and they friction fit, but these ones do have a slip fit because they were cracking the tubes a lot of the time, so we went to a slip fit on these. So we will need to put a little bit of glue on the inside of our tubes when we press these in. Alright, so we're going to start with our clip cap assembly, and our grain alignment on this is, I had the little chip out on this end, so I know this is our top piece, and then we had our bushings and everything lined up for our grain alignment here, which we can match up better once we get our center band coupler in. So we'll just leave that off to the side for a moment, and we'll start with the clip cap assembly. I've got the extender nozzle on here so I can get into the tube and get just the right amount of glue that I need, not too much. We're just putting a very, very fine layer inside that tube. And the nice thing is that fill and finish is going to give us plenty of working time. I don't have to hurry and press these parts in, for fear of it getting stuck. So I'll get that, and I'll put my parts on the nylon end, and then we'll use the brass piece on our exposed end here, that way we don't damage any components. And then before I press that all the way in, a lot of times I like to adjust the clip. That way if there's a blank spot or something, or a void or a defect you want to cover up, you can adjust that and then cover it up with the clip. Or if you want, you can show off more of the burl eyes and you don't cover those with the clip assembly. So there's that. We'll hit it with a little bit of activator down inside that tube. Now that piece is ready to go. As far as our center band coupler, I like to just put this in as a placeholder, not all the way inserted, and then I like to thread in the nib cap coupler to where that's fully seated. And then what I like to do is I'll adjust my grain, that way when it's threaded and closed, that's where my grain alignment's going to be, and that looks pretty good there. So from there I'll unscrew this piece and set that off to the side for a moment. I'll set that up, and then we can put just a tiny bit of glue on the inside here. And then we can press in our center band coupler. When you're pressing your parts together, if you ever feel a lot of pressure or anything, you might want to pull those parts out and double check that there's not any debris or any extra glue that you left behind inside the tube, or if you skip the barrel trimming process, because a lot of times if there's debris inside the tube or a burr and you press those parts in, you can actually crack the tube because there's nowhere for those parts to go, so it'll expand the tube and crack your blank. So if there's way too much pressure when you're putting that in, just be careful and go slow. If you need to, pull it out and then check it for debris as well. So we can double check our grain alignment here. That looks pretty good. And the other thing about this kit in particular is it has a triple start thread. So a lot of times if you thread it on and your grain doesn't line up perfectly, just back it off and start on one of the different starting points as well. I'll pull our nib cap coupler out, and we'll just put a tiny bit of glue on the inside of our tube here. Use that nozzle to spread it around. And then we can press in our nib cap coupler. And you want to be careful that you don't use too much glue. A lot of times you can have glue come out here between the coupler pieces or the trim ring and give you a bad fit. So I'll just make sure that's fully seated. And you notice I took off the riding nib. If you put a lot of pressure on these, you can bend these sometimes, so take those off. That way you're seating against a flat face right here on our threaded coupler. We'll do the same thing on our end cap coupler. Get just a small amount of glue. Spread that around with that nozzle. Extend our press out just a touch. And then we can press that and make sure that's fully seated. Once we have our components in there, I'll hit that with just a little bit of activator down inside the tube. Make sure that glue sets up really well. And now we can add our riding nib. So now it's time to put in our refill. This is a Schmidt rollerball refill. It's a really smooth riding experience. This is a really good refill. It's one of the things that separates some of the cheaper pens from the nicer higher end premium pen kits is you get a lot nicer refill. And the other thing with these premium pens, you're not just paying for the style of the pen, but you're paying for a better premium plated pen as well. There's precious metal plating on these, and the plating is a lot thicker than the cheaper pens, so it will last and be a lot more durable long term. On these higher end pens, I've never really worn the plating off, where like on the slim lines or some of the cheaper pens, you do wear the plating off after a few years, but these last a lot longer and make a lot nicer gift. So there's our pen complete. Our threaded coupler there is really smooth. It's got a triple start, and then we also have our postable end cap, which is nice. That way you don't lose your cap when you're riding with it. You can keep it on the pen. But I'm really happy with the Pippi U on this blank. Our plating choice with the blank selection made a really nice pen, and I like the satin finish we left on our blank. Nothing too glossy or plasticky feeling, so really happy with this. Now let's get our pen box and we'll put it in there and show you how well it fits. Alright, and the box we'll be using today is the Artisan Leatherette box. This is a really nice box for this size of pen, and there's still plenty of room if you wanted to turn a matching keychain lighter or a smaller EDC type pen. You can still fit it in the case. But this pen's ready to go. This will make a really nice gift. This would be a really good pen to sell at a market as well because it's a premium pen kit. And there's also a fountain pen conversion for this. If you didn't want to use a roller ball, it's just a different fountain pen nib that just screws directly into that coupler, and then you're ready to go. So hopefully you guys have learned some things about turning a premium pen kit and what separates them from some of the cheaper pens out there. But if you guys have any questions or comments, leave them in the section below, and subscribe to our channel for more wood turning videos.